Today in the episode, maximum pressure on Moscow. Lindsey Graham proposes supplying Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. Logistical chaos in Rostov. Attack paralyzes Russia's main railway supply hub. Provocation on the Sumy border. Civilians abducted for political and informational purposes. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham has called for increased pressure on Moscow if the Kremlin refuses a peaceful solution to the war in Ukraine. He stated that current diplomatic efforts are failing and that Putin continues to ignore proposals aimed at ending the fighting. Graham proposed strengthening sanctions against Russia and transferring Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine so the country can strike Russian missile and drone manufacturing facilities. He also suggested imposing high tariffs on countries that purchase Russian oil and officially recognizing Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism.
Putin has calculated that we would get tired and Europe would get weary. He made a huge mistake. NATO is bigger and stronger, and we're more committed than ever to make sure he does not take Ukraine by force. So Congress is on the verge of passing the most consequential sanction package in the history of the country. It will give President Trump tools he doesn't have today, a literal sledgehammer. And the big offender here is China, India, and Brazil. India buys oil from Russia cheap and resells it. That's despicable. I've talked to President Trump. He said last week it's time to move. He's tried to entice Putin to the table, but my goal is to end this war, and the only way you're going to end this war is to get people who prop up Putin, make them choose between the American economy and helping Putin.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and U.S. President Donald Trump met in Florida. According to Reuters, the leaders discussed ways to achieve peace in Ukraine and the role of the coalition of the willing. Starmer emphasized the importance of a fair and lasting cessation of hostilities and coordination of international efforts. The talks continued U.S. diplomatic contacts with Russia, Ukraine, and European countries. Ukraine remains fully committed to achieving a just and sustainable peace. This was stated by U.S. President's Special Envoy, Steve Witkoff, while summarizing the talks. According to him, meeting participants worked on a plan for Ukraine's economic development and future prosperity. Witkoff also noted that in his view, Russia remains committed to achieving peace in Ukraine following the talks. He added that Russian Special Envoy Kirill Dmitriev also held constructive meetings with the U.S. delegation to advance President Trump's peace plan. Meanwhile, the Kremlin is actively preparing to reject the peace plan proposed by the United States, Ukraine, and Europe. Russian officials have already stated that the document is allegedly unacceptable and that most of its proposals will be rejected. Putin's advisor Yuri Ushakov made the statement. According to him, Putin is awaiting a report from Special Envoy Dmitriev on the results of the negotiations. However, the Kremlin expects that most Russian proposals will not be included in the plan, while Ukraine and Europe have allegedly put forward unconstructive amendments. Putin is the main reason Russia's war against Ukraine has not ended. NATO Secretary General Rutte said this in an interview with Bild. He stated that the Russian dictator is willing to continue sacrificing millions of his own citizens, despite failing to achieve any real success on the battlefield. Rutte believes the Kremlin leader is obsessed with war, which is why forcing him to stop it is such a difficult task.
We need to do two things. First, we must increase defense spending and ramp up production. And second, we must ensure that Ukraine remains as strong as possible in the fight. Because if Russia gains control over all of Ukraine, it will have massive consequences for NATO, and we will have to spend far more than what we agreed upon in The Hague. If we stick to these commitments, we will outpace Russia and remain significantly stronger. The Germans are leading the way. They are now spending much more on defense. It is important. They are playing a main role, and all of Europe should follow this example.
The Ukrainian Defense Forces eliminated an additional 1,120 Russian servicemen over the past day, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. In addition, Ukrainian defenders destroyed 3 tanks, 10 artillery systems, and 109 operational tactical-level drones. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, the Russian army has lost a total of 1,197,860 personnel. 2 armored combat vehicles and 64 units of motor vehicles and fuel trucks were also destroyed. Help the truth go further. Share, comment, and subscribe. Let's continue. The crossing of the border by Russian troops in Sumy Oblast and the forced evacuation of Ukrainian civilians from the village of Grabovsky appear to be a provocation, according to Viktor Tregobov, head of the communications department of the Joint Forces. He stated that this is not a large-scale advance, but rather a targeted abduction aimed at a political or informational attack. Ukraine has already appealed to the international community to facilitate the return of its citizens. Meanwhile, the aggressor country's army continues shelling Ukrainian cities, particularly in the south of the country. More details in my colleague's report.
1,300 strike drones, nearly 1,200 guided aerial bombs, and 9 missiles of various types. That is how many weapons Russia launched at Ukrainian cities this week, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy reported. The main strike was directed at southern Ukraine, with the city of Odesa particularly affected. Emergency services continue working around the clock to restore electricity and water supplies for civilians.
I understand in detail what is happening there. Immediately after the massive strikes, not the first and unfortunately not the last, which have been occurring constantly, we held several meetings, both online and by phone. The military commander was tasked with urgently implementing temporary infrastructure solutions so that people would have access to at least the basic necessities, from food and fuel to medical supplies.
Among Russia's targets in southern Ukraine was a bridge near the village of Maiaky in Odesa region. According to Ukrainian expert in radio electronics and communication systems, Serhiy Bezkresnov, the bridge was attacked with 15 strike UAVs as well as a ballistic missile carrying a cluster warhead. He noted that the strikes were aimed primarily not at the bridge itself, but at people nearby, including those repairing the structure. A cluster munition would not significantly damage the bridge, but could seriously injure civilians.
Within a week, we will deploy 2 alternative logistics routes. One will be permanent, and the second will be an additional pontoon bridge. This is a short-term solution. Within 2 months, we will also create 2 more alternative routes to increase transport capacity on both sides of the Dniester River. Oleksiy Kuleba, Minister for Development of Communities and Territories of Ukraine, speaking to journalists. Unfortunately, such attacks have become more frequent. The explanation is simple. They have no other way to influence the south. They cannot demonstrate any success on land in this direction. There are 3 natural obstacles on the way to Odesa: the Dnipro River, the southern Bug, and the estuaries. An attack from the sea is also impossible, as amphibious operations require a ground component, and Russia has already suffered serious losses of large landing ships.
Due to intensified terrorist strikes on civilian infrastructure in Odesa region, 2 border checkpoints between Moldova and Ukraine are operating under a special regime. Moldova's border police have recommended that citizens refrain from traveling toward Odesa.
The border police advised citizens to avoid travel in the direction of Odesa. Authorities emphasized that only Ukrainian citizens are allowed to exit Moldova through the Palanka-Maiaky Udobne checkpoint. Another condition is that vehicles must not exceed 7 tons. Travel toward Bilhorod-Dnistrovsky is not restricted. From Newsmaker publication.
In addition to the ongoing shelling of Ukraine's civilian infrastructure, Russia continues to violate the laws of war by forcibly abducting civilians. Russian forces entered the border village of Grabovsky in Sumy region and forcibly deported more than 50 civilians to Russian territory. According to the Ukrainian Armed Forces Communications Directorate, most of them are elderly men and women, including an 89-year-old woman.
I have urgently appealed to the Human Rights Commissioner of the Russian Federation, demanding information about the whereabouts of the illegally deported Ukrainian citizens, details about their conditions of detention and urgent needs, and immediate measures for their return to Ukraine. I have also sent a letter to the International Committee of the Red Cross. Dmytro Lubinets, Ukrainian Parliament Commissioner for Human Rights, on Telegram.
Let me remind you that the international body has been established in The Hague to consider decisions on reparations to Ukraine for damages caused by Russia's military aggression. The amounts involved are expected to reach tens of billions of euros. The creation of the International Claims Commission for Ukraine was officially approved on December 16th at a conference in The Hague. On December 20th, Greece became the 35th country to sign the convention establishing the International Compensation Commission to review claims for damage caused to Ukraine. Reported by Nikita Skoblikov, UATV News.
Amid the failure of diplomacy, Senator Lindsey Graham proposes arming Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles and tightening sanctions on Russian oil. As Donald Trump and Keir Starmer meet in Florida to coordinate a strategy for a just peace, the Kremlin has already signaled it will reject any Western proposals. Meanwhile, NATO Secretary General Rutte warns that the war persists solely due to Putin's obsession, as he continues sacrificing his population despite the lack of real progress. Ukrainian defense forces report the elimination of 1,120 Russian servicemen over the past 24 hours. On the logistical front, an attack on the railway hub in Bataysk has paralyzed weapon supplies, while the Ukrainian Air Force neutralized 58 of the 86 drones launched by Russia. In Moscow, a car bomb killed a Russian lieutenant general. Authorities also described the incursion into Sumy Oblast and the abduction of civilians as a provocation, as drone strikes were recorded at 12 different locations and shelling continues in the south of the country. That's all for today. Tell us which country you're watching from and share your opinion in the comments. Remember, Ukraine fights, the world sees it. Glory to Ukraine and glory to the heroes.